And hello, everyone. It is Monday, the 21st. Yep, I'm on it. And it's 4:20. Um, we are recording this show. I am going to broadcast it. We're not going to edit it or anything like that. But I am home. And in terms of in the interest of bandwidth and everything else, I didn't want hopefully, we're not going to have technical difficulties or any limits with the bandwidth or anything. Today, we are joined by a very special guest. His name is Larry Forletta, and he is a retired DEA agent. And he currently runs a private investigation company. And Larry, from everything that I've seen, it sounds like he's pretty much dedicated his life to criminal justice. So let's bring him on. And Larry.
Hi, Jamie. How are you?
I'm well, Larry. How are you?
I'm doing fine so far, I guess.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, thank you so much for joining. If you would like, why don't you take a moment and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Well, as you know, I spent most of my life in law enforcement. I actually started my career with the Maryland State Police. I was there for almost 8 years. I started working undercover narcotics. From there, I decided that conducting those types of investigation is the career that I was looking forward to. I had some friends who had moved on and went to the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, and they talked me into coming over. And it's been, I would say, an exciting career, and it was a great move on my part.
All right. Very cool. And what year did you join the DEA?
I started with them in June of 1985, and I retired in October of 2006, so about 21 years with DEA.
All right. And you said when you started, it was, and maybe I misunderstood, but were you doing undercover investigations with the DEA, or was that prior to joining?
Well, that was prior to joining it. When I mentioned I was with the Maryland State Police, I worked in narcotics for about 5 years, and then I eventually left the Maryland State Police and went to DEA.
Okay. How much different was working for the state police to working for the DEA? Was your job pretty similar?
Well, I mean, there were some similarities in that, but to a greater extent, I mean, DEA is a major law enforcement agency, not that Maryland State Police isn't, but that's on the local and state level. But we're also, located, we're also an international law enforcement organization. So DEA has its own challenges as opposed to being on a different spotlight than the Maryland State Police.
Sure. And, for those people that may be confused, and I see this all the time. So the DEA is a federal agency. And what makes things federal crimes, one of the big ones is crossing state lines. Not that, a lot of people will say, oh, it's a federal offense. That must be serious. And a lot of times it doesn't mean that it's any more serious. It just, manages to get one of these federal parameters. There may be the biggest drug dealer in the history of the world who hasn't committed any federal offenses, compared to someone, a drug dealer who may have committed a federal offense but is much lower level. Am I pretty close there?
Well, there's a different distinctions because you have two different jurisdictions, one being the state side, one being the federal side. The major difference is that if you get involved in drug trafficking and you're indicted in the federal system, the penalties are a lot more stricter because you're looking at minimum mandatory sentences. Some of them carry starting out 20 years to life. And we don't deal with street dealers. We're dealing upper middle to the upper management to the cartels and organizations, of that nature. So that is the major difference when the federal government gets involved in investigations.
Sure. So when you started with the DEA in 85, was the major focus on marijuana or cocaine? I imagine a lot of people have seen the Netflix shows, Narcos, etc., which makes, those shows at least make it seem like that was the center of the criminal world at that time.
Well, the major drug that influenced this country back in the 80s was cocaine. Although I'll say that heroin has been a long attribute in this country for a long time. So I just think that cocaine became more well known and it affected different circles in society, which brought more attention to it.
Yeah. And from all of my research and reading and everything, and, cocaine is one of those, it's one of those substances that I don't want to say it defies or escapes logic or classification, but it really manifests itself differently kind of throughout the whole spectrum of society, it seems. With the lower income, et cetera, the proliferation of crack cocaine,
right.
And then the upper class kind of white collar, cocaine use. And maybe a lot of people don't even realize, but that all comes from the same drug. What was it like kind of seeing that evolution, so to speak?
Well, when you talk about cocaine, because it's in a powdery form and it's white, that's really not its original color, because when it's manufactured, they make it into, once they dry the leaves and they use a variety of chemicals to draw it out in the labs, then they make this white powdery substance and they add adulterants to that white powdery substance. And so people have a different perspective when they see something white as opposed to something yellow. And so I guess that's part of the marketing of what the drug traffickers would do to sell their product.
Sure.
And then you have a different spectrum when you talk about crack. Although crack is a base form of cocaine, it's very highly addictive as opposed to the powder cocaine, because you're taking all those chemicals, you're putting it into a little, what we call a rock, and people are smoking it, and it's causing instant addiction. And that's been the difference between crack, and that's been the difference between powder cocaine. And then when you begin to look at the differences that affected different communities, crack cocaine really spurged a lot of violence in some of the poorer communities in this country. And I think what happened was there became a disparaging of sentencing between crack cocaine and powder cocaine. So And you can see the effects of today's world saying, hey, look, some of these folks shouldn't have been in federal prison because of they're selling, small grams of crack versus the people that were selling kilograms of powder cocaine.
Yeah. So the first of many side roads here. How does that affect you kind of on the street? Larry, the DEA agent, is there room in a DEA agent's job to weigh those things, to maybe say, this shit doesn't make sense. It's the same drug, yet this guy who I busted 2 years ago, because I know the courts don't work fast, this guy who I busted 2 years ago with a fraction of the amount that I just busted this guy for, they just threw away the goddamn key for this guy. Does that ever, does that enter into your thinking?
Well, I think it has to a certain extent, because we have a job to do. Mm-hmm. And if we're getting information about certain individuals in certain locations and we begin that investigation, we don't decide whether they get prosecuted or not. It's up to the U.S. Attorney's Office to make that decision. I never did agree with utilizing federal resources for street dealing of crack cocaine. I think federal resources should have been much time spent on dismantling the organizations that actually bring these poisonous drugs into our country. But again, then there's cries out from the community saying, hey, we have all this violence and we need the authorities to do something about it. So now you begin to, you're pulled in two directions. On the one hand, you've got the community screaming, hey, there's too much violence in our community. On the other hand, you have to look and say, well, is it right to put an 18-year-old in prison for 10 years and get somebody that's selling 5 kilos of cocaine and gets 5 years? So I guess you have to look at the circumstances of every case. Yeah. And we try to stay away from being the judges of social injustice, so to speak. That's not our job. Our job is to stop the violence, is to arrest the drug traffickers, take them out of that community that are causing the major problems. And it's just not violence associated with crack. There's also violence associated with powder cocaine. There's violence associated with marijuana. There's violence associated with heroin, because there's one reason behind it. It's all has to do with money.
Yeah.
And that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what neighborhood you're from. That's where the violence occurs.
Right. No, and that's a great point that, that's what's often overlooked, I feel like, in the drug trade is, we hear all the talk about, education, rehabilitation, supply side, demand side, all of this stuff. But what's, oftentimes ignored, or at least not explicitly stated, is there's a reason that, people are willing to risk as much as they do. And it's because of exorbitant amounts of money.
Well, there's no question about the exorbitant amount of money. But we have to look at the supply side and the demand side. Okay. DEA started many years ago what they call a demand reduction program. In that demand reduction program was to go to the schools and educate our children about the issues of dealing with drug abuse, substance abuse. So there has to be an education component as part of the whole strategy of enforcement of the law. And we have to look at now, after leaving and getting out of the big picture here, we are also looking at the drug problem as a medical issue. And there are now different attitudes, different mechanisms to continue to educate people, treat people at the same time, which is the reason why drug courts were established by DEA. They did work with the local jurisdictions and say, hey, look, let's give these substance abusers some benefits in the sense to improve their life. Incarceration on that level may not be the answer. Giving a second chance may be that answer. It may help people turn their lives around. Mm-hmm. And you can see, even on the political side now, that we're talking a total different picture. They want to let more people out of prison versus putting people in prison. I think it's twofold. Some people deserve to be in prison for a long time, and others do not. And you have to look at a case-by-case basis. You saw and I don't recall the lady's name, but she was a grandmother. She was incarcerated almost for the rest of her life for drug trafficking. Her sentence was commuted by President Trump, and it goes on and on and on. So I still believe that people do deserve a second chance. I think that's part of humanity, that we do give people a second chance. We don't give violent criminals a second chance because their heinous crimes that they commit, they don't deserve a second chance. And you don't rehabilitate those type of individuals, despite what everybody else says.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we are probably generations, if not decades, removed from the notion of prison rehabilitating anyone. I mean, I don't even know that they make that argument anymore, that it's their aim. And yeah, I would agree with you that, if I'm picking up what you're putting down, prison isn't the place for, a drug user, who has an addiction, where it is the place for someone who is hurting people, who is importing the drugs, who is making all of the money off of those things. And I agree with you. That's a huge, huge difference. Has your ideas or opinions about the drug trade and drug users changed at all in the 35 years since you joined the DEA?
Well, I guess to a certain extent it has changed, but I just want to clarify something that people should understand.
Yeah.
And this has been some misconceptions portrayed by the news media. DEA, first of all, does not arrest drug users. That's way out of line, okay? Drug users that are arrested by the local and state authorities have committed some other type of crime to go with it.
Sure.
Burglary, robbery, to name a few.
Speeding.
Theft, so on, right. But on the federal side, we don't arrest drug users. We don't put drug users in federal prison. We go after the big fish, and we try to put the big fish where they truly belong, and that's in federal prison.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And so you had mentioned education, and it was funny because I can remember, DARE, and programs of the like in school when I was growing up. Have those programs shown any successes, whether it's in the numbers? I guess the fact that I can remember, that education that I received speaks to its success a little bit. But has there been any evidence that is any more than anecdotal?
Well, I could tell you, I was involved in some of those programs, and we always got positive responses from not only the teachers and school administrators, but the children themselves.
Mm-hmm.
how we helped educate them. And I believe if we saved one child or educated one child about drug abuse, it's a success. I don't know how you can measure it by the numbers. I don't have any statistics to reveal, but I can tell you it's positive in the sense that you know that after you gave that class, you walked out with a positive approach. And to me, that meant more than anything, walking out of that class knowing that I may have helped some child and educated them about the dangers of drugs.
Yeah. And you can tell me if you saw this as well, but I know for me, when you're a child, you think of a drug addict and you get a picture in your head. And whether, between that and the education and everything else, you say, I would never want to be that guy or that gal. So if what I need to do is not do drugs, that's easy. It really is that black and white mindset as you're young and, you're growing up. And then I feel like if you get to my age, it's impossible that you haven't come across a drug addict who is either functioning within the confines of society or, seems to, pardon the expression, but have their shit together. Which kind of questions the stereotypes. And at least for me as an adult, you see that shit, it's not this black and white. Here's this cat with all the education in the world who screwed up his back. Doctor gave him a bunch of pills. When the federal government and everybody else realized how big a deal the pills were, they said, hey, doctors, game's over. Cut the shit out. So now these people are doing heroin. Not because they missed their day, but because they are so addicted on things that were legally prescribed that they need to do something. Have you seen that throughout your career where, maybe the idea that you had of, drugs and a drug addict, and again, with the caveat that you're not going after drug addicts, you're going after drug dealers, has that changed throughout the years?
Well, I have seen drug addicts when I worked in the streets of Baltimore,
Sure.
because it's a well-known heroin addiction city. So I've seen drug addicts. I've seen them laying by needles and so on. And then on the other hand, I've seen people who were addicted to pills, as you mentioned, from Oxycontin, oxycodone, to Vicodins, to a whole series. And so what has happened is, we had, and DEA, as a matter of fact, has arrested and does continue to arrest doctors and pharmacists and chain supplies. Now you saw that Purdue Pharma finally pled guilty. The company did. I still think the founders should be in federal prison because they poisoned a tremendous amount of people in this country, and they did it legally.
And on purpose.
Right. And as you know, well, if you've seen, there was a big 60 Minutes issue dedicated, and there were some retired DEA agents that spoke out against Purdue Pharma and how some of the politicians, as we all know, have get some of their funding from these type of companies. And that's the problem with trying to mix politics and law enforcement. I think they don't mix. That's my opinion.
Well, once you do start to mix, you almost lose any credibility when push comes to shove.
Yeah, you lose the independence that the law enforcement system, for example, like the Department of Justice, was created. It was created not to be biased, either if you're appointed by a Democratic president or a Republican president. You're supposed to be neutral and stay away from politics. I think the previous administration politicized the Department of Justice so much that it created a lot of issues. When I worked for DEA, because DEA is under Department of Justice, I had a total different perception of the Department of Justice. Many prosecutor friends that worked there, and I believed in the system of independence. And you can see that the current Attorney General Barr, who's been through a lot of criticism from both sides of the aisle, but he's a straight shooter. And straight shooters get criticized for doing their job. And when he didn't disclose maybe an investigation going on another politician's son, that's what the Department of Justice does. They don't disclose investigations. They don't want to jeopardize the process.
Right.
And that's how I was taught. The Department of Justice policy, along with DEA, is that you neither confirm nor deny an investigation. Why tip your hand?
Which is, pretty much as good an acknowledgement that it's ongoing as anything. But yes, I agree, because in terms of conducting an investigation, it probably behooves the investigator to not have the person know that they're being investigated.
Exactly. And that's the whole process of doing federal investigations. It's secretive. It's not supposed to be some political arm for a politician to say that so-and-so is under investigation so that they can get political points. That's the way things should never be done. And I hope that any administration takes the politics out of the Department of Justice and get back to the way things should have been done. The last administration, prior to this one, politicized it. You've seen some corruption at its worst. And it's an embarrassment to agents like me. It's an embarrassment to other agents from different agencies that risk their lives, that work on the front lines, and they believe in the system of justice.
Yeah. I agree. Certainly, if the Department of Justice is political, and that's the executive branch, and the two shouldn't mix. And I would argue that if the two are mixed, then neither can function properly. So with the caveat, again, that we're not going to solve this problem, you and I, right here. We might solve it in the long term, but it's not going to be right here. What are some small steps that you think can and should be made immediately to help, to sever the politics from the Justice Department and vice versa?
Well, I think, both parties have to realize the independence of the Department of Justice and federal law enforcement agencies. And I think if there's ever an agreement that can come, let's call it bipartisan, that they have to stop this nonsense of letting the Justice Department, the federal agents, whether they're FBI or DEA agents, let them do their jobs. At the end of the day, that's where they have to stay out of it. Because the system under the Department of Justice was never designed to get politics involved in the operations of law enforcement. It's just, they don't mix. And
Sure.
I think both parties are doing a disservice to our country by trying to infect political partisanship in the Department of Justice.
Yeah, I would agree with you 100%, Larry. So I'll ask the question: can we unring that bell? It seems I'll be perfectly candid with you. I think that I am as knowledgeable as any layperson about what happens in government and different branches of government and the Constitution and such. I can't remember 10 years ago hearing, a court ruling and going to Wikipedia to see who appointed this judge. Would never even have crossed my mind. And now it's something that is almost inescapable. It's almost like a decision that nobody could ever have an issue with. The circuit court rules that water is wet. This just in. And inevitably, I feel like some Yahoo's going to be like, oh, of course, Trump appointed this guy. Of course, he's going to say water's wet. I mean, I don't know that that's a change or ever get fixed. And I don't even know how we could begin short of eliminating political parties, which I know we can't do.
Right. Well, we have a broken system, and obviously we got to do something to change it back. I can tell you, when I appeared in front of federal judges, I didn't know if they were a Democrat or Republican, because they were there, and I had the most highest respect for federal judges. Again, whether they're Democrat or Republicans, it didn't make a difference because they ruled on law.
Right. Yeah. The system of jurisprudence does not have a left and a right wing. So yeah, it's so funny, Larry, because it is like foreign to me to hear, and it almost makes me cringe, because I've got to imagine a lot of these judges aren't real jazzed about that either.
No, I don't think they are either. And I think, a lot of it, again, it stems back to the news media. I think they have distorted so many things, from the Department of Justice to the judiciary. Again, like I said, being in law enforcement for all those years, and I worked on a state level, and I looked at state judges the same way as I looked at federal judges. It didn't matter to me whether they're Democrat or Republican. It was there on basis of my respect for them, because of my respect for the law. And, I didn't always agree maybe with the judge's ruling, but at the end of the day, I accepted it and we moved on. And that's kind of the way the process is in a judicial system. It's very rare that you get a lot of criticism of judges. And now that's all changed because, again, I think the news media has stoked the fire. And by distorting things, and by not just reporting the way it should be reported, but opinionated reporting, then I think we've moved away from those facts.
Yep. Can you give me an example of that, Larry? Like maybe one issue, that, because of reporting or, different things like that, that may have either informed or misinformed people, to come out for or against a certain judge or a certain issue?
Well, let me go back to law enforcement, because that's where
because that's what we're supposed to be talking about, right?
Right. But I can tell you, for example, on shootings, let's go back for that.
Sure.
Now, obviously what happened in Wisconsin with a knee in the neck. That was totally outrageous. That should have never happened. You punish the individuals that committed that offense. However, you don't take the rule of law into your own hands and destroy property, loot, burn, steal, etc. Now, when law enforcement gets into a shooting, there's an investigative process, okay? That investigative process involves an internal affairs department, a district attorney's office. Sometimes it'll go up to the federal side by the Department of Justice. So there's a lot of levels in place on shootings. So, for example, you hear like in the Michael Brown case in Missouri, they said that the officer, did this and did that. What they didn't say is that officer was fighting for his life and had no other options but to shoot Michael Brown. And in that case, it was investigated by the FBI, Department of Justice, and they ruled it as a justifiable shooting. Okay. Now, there have been other officers who have committed crimes and they've gone to prison for it. So I think there's a balance of check systems within the law enforcement community. So when the news media says it wasn't a justified shooting, get all the facts first before you put that out. And that's what happens, because now you're putting the match and you're pouring the gasoline and you're lighting the match. Everybody should not be prejudgmental on a shooting. Let the facts come out and then let the system handle it. We have a system in place. We don't have a system in place for people to loot, burn, steal, and cause other injuries because they don't agree with what happened on the street. And that, to me, is where the distortion comes in from the news media.
Yeah, it is definitely, I would, the news media, another thing that 10 years ago, I never thought that I would watch the news and say, I don't agree with this guy. I'm going to change the channel because there's another guy that's going to tell me something different. It's the news used to be just that. This is what happened. So yeah, about, the Michael Brown and the Kenosha, the Wisconsin thing. I agree with what you're saying, looting, robbing, burning, et cetera. There is no place for that in a civilized society. Just like there is no place for a police officer to put a knee on a guy's neck for 10 minutes.
I agree with you 100%. And I think what you'll find is that most law enforcement professionals will tell you that there's no room for that type of behavior from another law enforcement officer.
It's got to make your job so hard.
Yes, it does. And so what happens is when you've got 99.9% of law enforcement that are honest and hardworking and decent, and that small percentage goes the other way. Yeah. And believe me, I have arrested other law enforcement officers for being involved in drug trafficking. I didn't even hesitate. Okay. Because there's no room for that in our profession. There was no room for crooked cops, dirty cops, whatever you want to call them. But it's like anything else in life. They're human beings in the system, whether, as I mentioned, they're school teachers, they're priests, they're Indian chiefs, they're politicians, they're lawyers, they're doctors. Corruption, bad behavior is part of being a human, and humans do those types of bad behavior, and they have to be punished for that bad behavior. And if the news media reports false information, I think they should be held accountable, as what happened to the young man from Kentucky when he was down there for I think it was a Catholic organization, and there was a protester who happened to be of an American Indian descent, and then CNN and some of the other outlets, they went and blasted this kid for being, disrespectful. And this kid was like 15, 16 years old, and now he's a multimillionaire because of the distortion by the news media. They should have looked at the facts before they made any decision. Excuse me.
Yeah, yes, you're preaching to the choir there, Larry. I agree, and it's funny because it's going to tie right back into what we were talking about before, which is money.
Yep.
And what you're saying, I 100% agree with. And I will say on the other side of it, I believe it was Michael Brown that was, he was the guy that got shot when he got into his car.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. So after that happened, all I saw on social media and everything else was about this guy being a child molester, which I don't understand how that has entered our public conscience, where if you don't like somebody, you just, he's a child molester. And I just figure, if a lot of these people on social media and things, this guy's not an idiot. So if he's, insisting that this guy is a child molester, he must have heard it somewhere. And, I researched it. I read a little bit, and then, trying to help out, I see, it doesn't seem like he's a child molester, because what he was charged with wasn't a sexual offense against a child. I think what probably happened is, some sort of domestic, and maybe slapped his girlfriend's ass on the way out the door. And that rose to the level of charging him with that. So yes, on both sides of it, there is so much misinformation because there's money there. And I could not agree more with you, Larry. It's bullshit. It makes your job, or any law enforcement officer's job, so much more dangerous. So, it's not a dream job, I wouldn't say, to begin with, but when there is so much of this us versus them animosity, frankly, so much of which is made up, it really makes an impossible job even harder. And I know that wasn't a question, and I apologize. But I just want to go back to what you had said about the guy kneeling on the guy's neck. There's no place for that. Could not agree more. It's bullshit. And so why did the cops that were there let it happen?
I don't have an answer for that one. I do know this much, that those officers were new. Mm-hmm. And here's the problem. The problem is a lot of new personnel are reluctant to say anything because you have a senior officer there who's actually doing what he's not supposed to be doing. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, here's something that's never been addressed about that issue. This guy had 18 complaints against him. And my question is, if that guy was such an issue with the department, why are new guys assigned to him? Why is there a new guy assigned to somebody like this?
Why is he still a cop would be my question.
Well, that's true. And I can tell you, when I started, in training, once you graduated, like, for example, in Maryland State Police Academy, you're placed with a senior trooper, mm-hmm. and you learn from that senior trooper mannerisms, respect, how to treat people, all of that. And it's a disservice to put a young person who just got out of the police academy with some knucklehead
Yeah.
that's a seasoned officer, because there are knuckleheads out there. Let's face
Yeah.
it.
Of course. I know I used to manage a sales team. And, I've said forever, sales is sales. I don't care if you're selling nuclear secrets or table salt. It's the same thing. And I would argue, when I was a manager and a new person would come out on the floor, hey, Jamie, this is your new guy, blah, blah, blah. Let him sit with somebody and see, the lay of the land. Well, yeah, like you said, I know there's some knuckleheads on my team who maybe their knuckleheadedness hasn't raised to the level that they're no longer working for me. But, I also know that they're not someone that I'm going to sit the new guy with.
Right.
And,
Well,
yeah, it seems like that one, very small thing that it seems like was overlooked there. And why those cops that were there didn't do or say something is beyond me. With it being said that, like you said, you're a new guy, you don't stand up to this guy, especially in the heat of the moment. You've got adrenaline going, you've got everything else. With the singularity of focus, there isn't room for, should this jackass really be doing this? Because you're focused on the job. One of the things that always strikes me about this issue is, I don't want to call it hypocritical because it's not the right word. But, let's say this new cop that was sitting there saying, you know what? I knew what he was doing was bullshit. I didn't think he was going to kill that guy, but I knew he should not have been doing that. That person seems to maybe earn our respect. Good on you for speaking out, blah, blah, blah. However, let's just say completely different set of circumstances. There's 4 guys in a car. The 2 guys in the back seat are young, and these are new friends of theirs, and they know they're kind of knuckleheads, but they also get all the chicks, so they're someone you want to hang out with. Okay, in the course of the night that you're out being a jackass, someone gets shot. Well, all 4 of those people in the car are responsible as accessories. So it just seems, and I agree with everything you have said, but it does seem like there's a bit of a double standard in terms of the perception or the amount of responsibility that we put someone under. So in this case, we're going to say that 18-year-old kid in the back seat needs to show more restraint, needs to be more vocal, in saying, look, guys, this is a bad situation. We don't want to shoot that guy. If you shoot that guy, I'm going to go to jail. I don't want to go to jail. But we don't hold those cops who are in the same position, that in their head, they're saying, this guy shouldn't be doing this. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about that? And how would you speak to that?
Well, remember something about law enforcement, and I know your analogy about salesmen, but we're talking about life and death situations.
Oh, absolutely.
And split second decisions to try to evaluate a situation. Again, could those young officers have said something to the person that was doing what he did to that individual? And the answer to that is yes. You can speak out. You have a right to speak out. If you don't feel it's right, you say something. If I was in a situation, and I've been in situations, and I spoke out about certain things. They may not like it, but at the end of the day, that's just too bad. If I saw somebody doing something stupid, I'd tell them about it. As from one individual to the other.
Right.
So in the sense that they saw this happening in front of them, yeah, they should have did something. They should have said something. They should have said, get off of them. They should have pulled them off of them. If I was there and I saw that same situation, I probably would have done that, just knowing me and the way I am. And the one thing that I learned is I have learned a long time ago about respect. Respect is earned. It is never given to you. This all comes from your home. This comes from your upbringing. This has nothing to do with police work. And as I tell everybody, I grew up Catholic. I was an altar boy. I learned respect in my Catholic upbringing, and I learned it in my home. And you learn about treating people despite who they are or what they are. Okay. And so I would never put myself in a position to mistreat somebody like that. I would do my job professionally. And once I subdued somebody or once they were in handcuffs, it stops, period.
Right.
You don't get an extra punch in, an extra kick in. You do none of that. You stop.
Right. Because, and I think what a lot of people overlook, maybe because of the simplicity of it, is that police and law enforcement, they're not the judiciary. It is not their job to judge, and it is not their job to punish. It is their job to apprehend and collect evidence. And when that job is done, professionally well, etc., then you've done a great job. And that's one of the things. And, this seems to happen a lot more nowadays, too, where these issues that should be very, very black and white. I don't care who you are, what color you are, what job you are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anybody that looks at that guy kneeling on a handcuffed suspect's neck for almost 10 minutes and says, well, we didn't see what happened before that, that's bullshit. That's just, that's part of the news media telling you,
right.
Like, anybody that looks at that and says anything other than that is bullshit is wrong. And I hate to paint anything in that color. But like you said, I don't care what happened before that. Once you get handcuffs on the guy and he is no longer a threat to you or anybody else, it's over. Put him in the fucking car and get him to jail, right?
Yeah, that's the way it's supposed to work. And that is the way you're trained. And there's a lot of misinformation about police training. Police training doesn't teach you to punch people in the face once they're handcuffed. Police training teaches you once a person has been subdued or under arrest, then it's over.
Sure.
So is there a need for more training? I am a proponent of training. There's never enough training to go around. Society changes, so does law enforcement have to change. They have to adjust to different situations. And let's face it, being a police officer in today's world is extremely dangerous. And it's just as dangerous as when I first started, to be honest with you.
I would agree with that 100%.
And so it is about training. It has a lot to do with training. And so police departments need to continuously be educated, trained. And the other issue is systemic racism, as we constantly hear from different political factions that occurs in a police department. I don't believe that exists like they say it does. And the reason why I mentioned that is because the law enforcement community is made up of a lot of minorities. You'll see in major police departments across the country, there are African American police chiefs, Hispanic police chiefs, so there is a melting pot within the law enforcement community as it fits that particular community. And a lot of it had to be decided long ago by the courts. And I think it has adjusted. Is there racism like they say there is? No. Are there racist? Of course. But there's racist in every walk of life,
Right.
And so
I think
when the news media portrays the police, this is the narrative and that's out there. And so if you continue to preach that same narrative over and over again, people will believe it.
Yeah. Some people will, and probably the same people that believed it to begin with. But yeah, I would agree. And it's funny because training, you think about training to the level of like the military. They train until it replaces their thought because they don't think. They've trained it, they've drilled it so much that it replaces their thought. And yet, there's the old expression, no battle plan survives contact with the enemy. And it seems to me that with policing, it's this same thing. We can train, and this is going to be this, and this. I'll give you an example. I saw it was some sort of story where the cops reached in a guy's pocket and the cop got pricked. I say pricked, that's not the right. Stabbed with a hypodermic needle. Mm-hmm. And he beat the shit out of the guy. Now, the suspect was handcuffed. And, when the cop reached in his pocket and the hypodermic needle, he beat the shit out of the guy. I don't think that's because he wasn't trained not to beat the shit out of the guy. I think that was his battle plan that didn't survive contact with this potentially life-threatening injury. And again, I'm not saying I wouldn't have done the exact same thing. But it seems like, I guess my long-winded way of saying is all the training in the world goes out the window when we're faced with something that requires an immediate thought. And racism, I think there's a difference between overt racism and the systemic or institutionalized, racism, which is in the heat of the moment. You see 3 white guys run this way and you see 3 black guys run this way. What is your threat assessment of each? Everything else is equal. They're each wearing white t-shirts and baggy shorts. What is the threat assessment and which do you apprehend and how? And look, the thing you said earlier that bears repeating, 99.96% of all cops are just like we want them to be. And they will see bullshit and call it bullshit. And, I would also say that on the other side of it, a cop may say, well, I'm not racist because look, my buddy Joe here, we play pickup ball every Wednesday night. I would die for him. He works with me. He's my partner. And That's not what we're talking about. Just like when I say, I don't hate cops, the guy that's at the grocery store that says hi to me every day, what an awesome guy. And my cousin who retired from the state troopers, love that guy. But that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is a group of people, that's where these prejudices, for lack of a better term, kind of manifest themselves. And I don't know that there is a way to quote unquote fix that. And obviously all of these things, I don't want to say they're open for interpretation, but I would say that both sides are pretty well dug in. I just want to tell you, as we wrap up here, I appreciate your time so much, Larry. This is one of the things that has jumped out to me since those things, the Michael Brown and the other gentleman's name escapes my memory, but Floyd, yes. In the aftermath of those things, with all of the civil unrest, all of these things that we've seen from law enforcement. We had one here in Rochester that actually happened in March that didn't come out until like the fall. And what I go back to is these cops, or not even these cops in general, know that everybody has a cell phone, that everybody has a camera, and that police officers and or police as an institution are under more scrutiny than they've ever been under. And yet we keep seeing these things. So if this is the police acting their best, which is what I would think, knowing that everybody's eyes are on them, how do we keep seeing this?
That's kind of really hard to explain. Why people are, for lack of a better word, so stupid to do stupid things when they know they're on cameras.
Sure, we'll go right back to the beginning of it. How does anybody become a drug addict when they learned in fourth grade that drugs are going to kill them? And, so yeah, I guess it's an unanswerable question, but it's something that I keep thinking, like, because believe me, I understand how important cops are. And every one of these incidents that just erodes the public trust just a little bit more, it breaks my heart, frankly.
Right. Well, I mean, the thing is, I think, you have to look at the big picture. Now, I could tell you a lot of those videos don't show the whole incident.
Yep.
They show what somebody
100%.
may have filmed and created a different perspective, which is why I mentioned from the very beginning, let the investigators do their job. Let the investigation fall where the chips fall, and then make that decision on what happens to those persons who may have committed a crime, may have abused their power, and so on. But I think, again, taking matters into your own hands is not our system of justice. That should never be as a justification for what maybe some police officer did or did not do. And so I think what we have to do in all these cases is keep an open mind, let the system fall where it goes, and not be prejudging because you saw this particular incident on a video. There may be more to it than just that video.
Inevitably, there is, yes.
And generally what comes out is, oh, I didn't see that.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't shown. Was shown on the news media.
Yep.
That only little part of it was shown on the news media. Oh boy, now we got to go all over this again. And here's the real facts, not just some of the facts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, and again, it makes me a little bit scared, but I would say that is on both sides. And here's my thought, and that not to compare anybody to children, either cops, criminals, citizens, neighbors, whatever. But typically, and I would say this almost across the board, the things that you don't see are probably just as bad, if not worse, than what you do. And that's on both sides. And again, I go back to, if you know that everybody is watching you, how the hell do you beat the shit out of a handcuffed guy? And again, I'm not asking you personally, and I don't want anyone to think that, like I said, my cousin is a former state trooper, and he and I get into some spirited debate. And I always go back to, because it seems like cops or law enforcement people, it seems like their immediate response is one of, like you said, let's see everything, let's find out the whole story, rather than, no, that's fucking bullshit. I don't care what the whole story is. That cannot happen. And because of that, it's like I'd said to you, and like I've said to my cousin and to a lot of other law enforcement officers, it makes your job so much harder. It's like if I'm in a race against Olympic sprinters on Saturday, and I just found out today, look, I'm already going to get smoked. There's no doubt about it. I probably shouldn't drink all week, or go out and have a billion beers the night before the race. That's not going to help. So do you think that, again, with the understanding that we all need to take a breath and let the investigation go where it may and let the facts come out, do you think that maybe the law enforcement side of things, whose fallback is to defend or protect the person in uniform, do you think that maybe hurts their perception, in the bigger picture?
Well, I mean, we live in a different society.
Mm-hmm.
We live in a different world. A lot of the institutions that were once respected are now vilified.
I would say sacred, Larry, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I can remember, even being a snot-nosed brat, I could still remember, when you saw the cops,
Right.
They weren't someone to fuck with. That wasn't part of the game. That's when the game was over.
Yeah. Well, and again, there's a lot of factors behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them, and I'm not going to say that it's just the media's fault at this. I think it has a lot to do with it. But there has been a breakdown of our institutions. There's a lack of respect for not just law enforcement. There's a lack of respect for churches. There's a lack of respect for our military. There's a lack of respect for our own country. And so
for our neighbors, there's a lack of respect. I think we can.
Yeah, I could say that's part of the issues that are out there. And when you look at NYPD, okay, and I had some friends on NYPD, and I still know some people that are NYPD guys. This agency, one of the best law enforcement agencies in the world. And look what has happened to them, because it's the lack of political leadership that has affected the ability of law enforcement. And so I think, when you have officers that are leaving in droves, there's a problem here. and it ain't just the cops. And so, you've got to look at the big picture. I agree that, we have to hold people accountable. I believe in holding people accountable, whether they're a priest, whether they're a cop, a politician, a judge, whoever. There's accountability in our system. And so as I go on, I can tell you that our institutions have been broken down. We have to rebuild them. We've got to rebuild trust back into those communities. And that's, at the end of the day, that's where it's all at, is building trust back into the communities that generally, and I say generally, support law enforcement. Whether you're the poorest community or whether you're the richest community, I think there's a general support for law enforcement.
I would say that unquestionably so. And I would also say that almost universally, people support good cops doing things the right way. Just like I would expect that anybody who saw, that cop kneeling on the guy's neck universally can say, nope, no, I don't need any more info. That's wrong. I would also think that people should be able to say any cop who's doing things the right way not only deserves my respect, but deserves more than that. They deserve the benefit of the doubt and my respect. And part of that erosion that you spoke of, I think that maybe that was the first thing that went, was the benefit of the doubt, where before law enforcement, they had the respect and the benefit of the doubt. And it seems like the benefit of the doubt has gone, and the respect universally, I would say, is gone. So yeah, Larry, I appreciate your time so much. This is the link to your agency, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're currently doing?
Well, after I retired from DEA, I started my own investigation business. And I've been doing it now for about 14 years. And it's been, I would say, pretty successful. And I've learned a lot in being a business person as opposed to being a law enforcement officer. And I gained a different side of respect for people who are in their own business. And when you did what I did, you risked your life, but at least you were getting a check every 2 weeks.
Yeah, and I think we can agree, Larry, that policing should not be a business. I understand that it takes money, but it should not be a revenue generating source, nor, you shouldn't have to make your own funds, so to speak.
Oh, yeah. Well, but in the private sector is where I'm at now.
Sure.
You're learning to run this as a business. Although I still have the satisfaction of trying to help people with different issues and different issues that they have, whether they lost their child to a drug overdose, whether it was somebody that was accused of being sexually assaulting somebody on a college campus. And so, or whether it's an internal investigation on a police department. And I've been involved in those. So, there's a lot of different facets in the private investigation field. The perception of, guys watching husband and wives and all that other stuff. There's just so many, there's a lot of misconceptions, just like there are in police as opposed to the private investigation side. So, but for me, it's been rewarding in the sense that I am now my own boss. And I've learned a lot of things about marketing, about, a lot of different issues that I had no knowledge of in looking at the big picture. So I'm very appreciative that people who run their own business and the difficulties and challenges that they face.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that is a great place to wrap up. Larry, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. Again, I have the utmost respect for law enforcement officers, especially the ones, look, I have respect even for the douchebags because it's still not an easy job. But those folks that are good people that are doing a great job despite insurmountable challenges, my hat is off to them more than anybody else, because if someone's really pissing in your Kool-Aid and you're still showing up to work every day and doing your best to make this world a better place, which is what we expect and hope of everyone. So I want to thank you very much for your time, Larry, for your service. I hope you and yours are safe and have a great holiday. And there's your website right there, fcisllc.com. And the floor is yours, Larry. So what else you got?
That's it, Jamie. Thank you. I appreciate it. And just let me know when this thing is going to be aired so that I can get my marketer to do your job.
Absolutely. I can send you the link as soon as it goes up.
Okay, I appreciate it. And by the way, I am looking to start my own podcast.
Really?
Yeah, I think I've been contacted by a few people, and I've been encouraged by some of my friends to say, hey, look, you might have something there. So take a good look at it.
Yeah. I mean, true crime is huge. All of those things are huge. I listen to a lot of podcasts, in the car, and a lot of it is fascinating and a lot of it is infuriating.
Right.
So there's certainly a good market for it. And I would certainly be listening, Larry.
Thank you, Jane. Okay.
Thank you very much. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. See you now.
Take care.
All right.
Bye. All right, everyone. That was Larry Forletta, retired from the DEA, been in law enforcement his whole life. And that was really cool perspective to get. Not much disagreement from me. I think, like I said there, our prejudices or beliefs, we almost pass them off because we bring them back to one person. We say, I don't dislike cops because Joe at Wegmans is always super nice to me and says hi when I get there, and the same thing. Oh, but when there's 20 cops, whoa, I think I'm out of here. And I would argue it goes the same way. You see one black guy that you play basketball with or that you have coffee with. You think, no, I'm not racist. Are you kidding me? I stood up at his wedding. But middle of the night, you see 20 black guys or white guys, whatever the case may be. Different situations bring out different responses, many of them visceral responses that our training and thinking don't really prepare us for. So thank you guys very much. I think this will be up before Christmas, maybe today. I hope you enjoy it. Please share it, like it, all of those things. All of those things help. The more people that see this and share this, the better guests I am able to get, and the better shows I'm able to bring you guys. So thank you very much. Please stay safe. safe out there, and have a great holiday.